the reasons that the big boys gave years ago to do what they were going to do, which was to bioengineer people, basically dumb down, eliminate all their opposition to their big agenda, their utopian agenda, the socialist Fabian types of agenda. And they said that they'd have to really alter the male drastically. Because in all societies, it's the same in Africa today, in all societies, it's the male who's more conservative. I don't mean he goes and wears a blue tie. No, he's conservative in his ideas, doesn't like the changes. He's more suspicious in who's changing what and why. And he's generally right, in fact. And they stand up against what they see as tyranny, or a sort of master relationship takeover. That's how they see it. And they said that the big boys said they'd have to literally attack or bioengineer the males because he is the aggressive one. That's the biggest problem that stood in their way in all ages. Hitler said the same thing too. He said all the propaganda, and this is Goebbels, all the propaganda must be aimed at the woman because she will fall for it. She'll fall for peace, safety, food, security for her children, you see. And she'll come to us. And he said, therefore must follow the child and then must follow the man. That's how it works. And all he was doing was quoting something I think ancient Nero said at one time too, one of the ancient Roman emperors. Same thing. This is an ancient technique. So the male has always been their main enemy to stand up and fight them, you see. Same with the empires down through the time when they were taking over more and more lands. It was always the guys who had to stand up and fight. Well, once you eliminate them, either through altering their hormones, for instance, which they've done a darn good job of doing, or many other ways, you don't have that problem yet. You can steamroll ahead with the New World Order, the planned one, their utopia. The same thing that Arthur Kessler said. They destroy the part of the brain that makes them an individual, and for world peace. They do it by finding chemical viral ways too, by inoculations and so on, of lobotomizing that part of the brain that made you stand up as an individual with other individuals against something which was bad for you. And part of that too was to start to drug children, mainly boys, till it's commonplace now. And I've gone through some of the histories of this in the past, where I've gone through the guys, the actual man who funded or came up with the idea for this, who worked for the big pharma, this doctor, and published his books on it and so on, and got an awfully stinking rich on it all, to say that these amphetamines and different drugs were good for the little boys. And of course, it was a must-be scenario. It's like Monsanto, nothing was going to stop it. This is an agenda, nothing's going to stop it. And the same with drugging the boys. Well, it was 1 in 10 children at one time, then 1 in 9, then 1 in 8. Here's the latest one here, as they don't stop, you see, from the Mail Online. Schools have a row reignited as new report shows that 1 in 4 boys is now diagnosed with special educational needs. 1 in 4. Why don't they just hurry up and say every them, because that's where they want to go. And this is the 20th of October. A quarter of boys being diagnosed with special educational needs at school, officials' research reveals. They're being singled out for additional support, it says, in primary and secondary schools, often because of behavioral and emotional problems. Have you looked at the conditions they're living in that country over there? Back with more on this after this break. Hi folks, we're back and we're cutting through the matrix. Just reading this article about 1 in 4 boys now are being targeted for special education. Special education, special. At one time you'd fall for it, think, oh, I'm special, eh? And then you eat drugs and all the rest of it. You cause the teachers no problems. You don't get fidgeted in class. See, boys don't sit in class very well. And they used to have them out for sports every couple of hours, stuff like that, but not anymore. They're going to be the same as the girls because after all, it's a state of mind, they say today. The girls are only girls because they've been taught to be girls, and boys were taught the same thing to be by their dads, you see, to be men, you see. And apparently that's all it is. And it's all a state of mind. And they should sit just like the girls. And you live now in a matriarchal society in schools, and the guys can't really handle it. because they want to fidget, they want to play, they want to burn off that energy. Anyway, that's the doctrine for the world. The only good point of it all is, and the hope in the horizon, as it says here, record high truancy at primary schools. That's a basic school you go into. More than 4,000 5-year-olds are missing lessons each day as primary school truancy rates soar to a record high. So there's hope yet that someone will try to evade as much indoctrination and drugging as they can. You see? And it says more than 63,000 primary and secondary pupils were missing from lessons on a typical day in the autumn and spring terms of 2009, 2010. That means they've got some discernment and they've got the ability to choose. So they're not done yet. So there's always hope there when you look down the road, eh? And part of the war, and that was the war to get the one character out of the way, subdued, and that was the male. The male was to be the target. Absolutely the target. We've gone through the bisphenol A, deliberate attack for many, many years, and we see its outcomes in the men today. We see the sterility that was also part of that too, because they wanted to depopulate the world, have less children. So you want a really placid male. You want to raise the females up to almost an aggressive stance. And they have done that too, because certain hormones will act the opposite way. Too many of them on the woman should become aggressive. That has happened. But they're really gone after the young children at school with bogus diagnosis for attention deficit and hyperactivity and all of that kind of stuff, you see. And it's incredible. It would be incredible to parents in the 40s and 50s and even 60s, although they had pharma on a roll at that time and psychology on a roll, via Hollywood and the magazines to popularize therapy and all that kind of stuff and psychiatry. But it would still have been incredible. It would be unthinkable for them to say, oh, by the way, we want to drug your children, especially the boys. Is he a bit restless in the chair? Does he want to run around sometimes and cause a noise? And well, that today, you see, has been classed as a mental illness. Incredible this has been done. But don't forget that all big agencies and associations, the medical industry, the pharmaceutical industry, the psychiatric industry are all in on this together. In fact, the psychiatric history of the profession it's got its own horror stories to tell you of genetics, because psychiatry really was born out of the ideas of Darwinism. These sort of nouveau psychiatrists that came out really wanted to believe that everyone who was mentally ill simply inherited it with a bad gene. You got a bad gene there, and that's what's caused that. And of course, even in Germany, and I know in the Soviet Union, they used the same technique on people who had illnesses. They sterilized them, or they even killed the offspring, even if there's nothing apparently wrong with the offspring. One day, my son, you'll go schizophrenic, and that was enough, you see, because daddy had it, or something like that. So it's the same thing today, you see, along with the poverty being an inherited gene, they claim, the eugenics. Psychiatry was really on board with all of this kind of stuff. And they were sterilizing people in Canada too, right through into the 70s in Alberta. There's a second case just been won by a woman who was sterilized out of the many, many that were sterilized under these eugenic acts. Never mind the States, that was sponsored by the Rockefeller Foundation in Cold Spring Harbor. Anyway, that's just by and by. It's coming off my top of my mind right now. But it ties in with this particular story. And I mentioned yesterday, 1 in 4 boys now are on these pills, I guess in the States and elsewhere. This one's Britain. And it says prescription for ADHD drugs by gender. And it gives you the categories and so on. And it says ADHD in a boy's brain. Figures compiled for the Globe and Mail by the IMS Health, an independent firm that tracks pharmaceutical sales, show prescriptions for ritalin and other amphetamine-like drugs for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder shot up to 2.9 million in 2009, a jump of more than 55% in 4 years. More than 2 million were written specifically for children under 17, a leap of 43% since 2005. And at least 75% of them were for young males. A ratio some see as evidence that society is making a malady of boyhood itself. So having a boyhood means you're mentally ill by the new classical definition. This ties into the fanatical writings I read from books that were printed in the 30s by some of the top players, who actually said that even people who had odd convictions like religion, odd convictions and superstitions like religion, or believed in marriage, would have to be exterminated. Exterminated is what they said. Top players in the global movement. Anyway, it says, what if we were drugging girls at the same time? Asked John Bradley, education professor at McGill University. What if the majority of these prescriptions were being written for girls? There'd be a march. The darn right there would be, because the guys have been whipped down and the girls have all been taught to be assertive, which is generally aggressive. It says the figures seem to suggest a spike of epidemic proportions. Now, here you have it. They create a new disease out of nothing and nowhere. Through the big the Psychiatry Association, their big thick handbook for diseases they add to it every year. They've even got nervous leg syndrome. When you're sitting there and you're bored stiff and your leg starts jumping and the ball of your toes, away goes your knee and you're tapping away. Well, that's a syndrome. We've got pills for that now. The great psychiatry, the bogus science, is part of the whole control mechanism. Back with more after these messages. Hi folks, we're back and we're cutting through the matrix. I should mention this article here is about Canada primarily. The one I read yesterday I think was for Britain. So they're coming out all over with their different statistics for different countries. So Canada's not got a huge population either. And yet, as I say, 2.9 million in 2009, up more than 55% of these youngsters on these drugs. And then it says here that but an analyst with IMS Broken, a division of IMS Health, says a 4-year snapshot is emblematic of a drug category that for more than a decade has surged annually in Canada by 10 to 13%. See, all the teachers get brainwashed into it as well. They want a quiet classroom. They want the boys behaving just like the girls, And you do have a matriarchal system. Most teachers are women now. And so they want the guys to behave like little girls. And guys are different from girls, regardless of what they try and tell you in this world of moral relativity and brain relativity. We're all the same. Some's like dressing like this and some like dressing like that and all that rubbish, you see. There is a difference, you see. Anyway, it says, while total prescriptions worth $249 million do not represent the number of people taking the drugs, a per capita breakdown of daily doses shows a similar escalation. It certainly suggests that the drugs are being abused, said Gordon Floyd, President and CEO of Children's Mental Health Ontario. Why do we even have that happen at Children's Mental Health Ontario? Anyway, there's a desire for the quick fix. The idea that, we'll fix this with a pill rather than spend a few months in counseling is pretty appealing, he says. Our penchant for pills has pegged Canada after Iceland and the US as one of the world's top 3 consumers of methylphenidate, including ritalin and similar drugs, according to the 2009 annual report of the UN International Narcotic Control Board. It's interesting, the terms they use, International Narcotic Control Board. You see, they control narcotics through the UN and other places. It's like the CDC, the Center for Disease Control. They don't eradicate disease, they just control it. We'll give them a pandemic here, and it's all under control, you see. Which based rankings on per capita consumption. A 2007 US report on global use of ADHD drugs also singled out Canada for a higher than expected consumption and suggested our exposure to American advertising and cultural norms play a role. Have you ever watched the CBC Canada? That's the government-run television series. They take all the kind of stuff you see on television in the US where they put a lot of money into making stuff to hook you into the movie or the drama or whatever. And they do it at higher quality in the US. And the CBC Canada, because it's always been run by communists, they cut to the chase and show you all the nasty stuff right away, all the sex and all the rest of it. And it's low budget, you see. So they say in Canada, and we churn out movies using taxpayers' money. And that's all it is, taxpayers' money. We churn out movies that nobody watches. No kidding. You can't give these movies away. They're so bad. Maybe that's why they're all on drugs. And by the way, if you did watch them, you'd be so darn depressed you might get on drugs. They're terrible, terrible. With all their, they don't even bother covering up, or slightly covering up or being more subtle in their embedding of programming into your brain on new political correctness. They go straight to the point. It's rather overdone and gross. That's how it used to be in the Soviet Union. Anyway, ADHD is one of the most commonly diagnosed disorders of childhood these days, which with core features that include an inability to focus and hyper and impulsive behavior. Increasingly, it's seen as a chronic condition that 60% of children never outgrow, and one that experts estimate affects 5% of children worldwide. But the diagnosis rates in North America are notoriously higher. In Canada, research suggests that 7 to 10% of children have ADHD, most often boys. No kidding. You know, at one time I can remember in school where they'd literally let the classes out if the boys were too fidgety. They'd have a break and let them go outside and kick a soccer ball around for 10 minutes and bring them back in. That's how boys are. That's how they are. They're different, you see. They're different. Not now, no. You're going to sit all day and just listen to the boring stuff of propaganda and political correctness that's being engineered into their brains. Anyway, boys are 4 times more likely to develop autism, 3 times more likely to suffer dyslexia, and 2 to 3 times more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD. And it says here, but some see a system of harried parents, school officials, and general practitioners too ready to label rambunctious young males. While boys might be 3 times more likely than girls to develop, I don't even believe it exists, to be honest with you, ADHD, research suggests they are 9 times more likely to be sent for a clinical assessment and 5 times more likely to be medicated for it. So ADHD prescriptions for males have increased 50% since 2005. There you go. It's great for pharma though, isn't it? But it's right on cue with what Aldous Huxley had in Brave New World and Brave New World Revisited, because that was the future that was planned back in the 1930s, and here we are today, and it's pretty well all here actually, right down to the promiscuity and using the platonic idea of all women in common, because you don't have to have a girlfriend. Yes, you can pick one up each night of the week, go to a dance, and that's what it's about. Everybody gets their share, you see. That's it. So that's how they do things in this wonderful, great system.